Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah McDougall, Director of Scholarship at Ben-Uri Gallery and Museum, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to this second live panel event in partnership with the German Embassy London. This accompanies the collaborative digital exhibition, Painting with an Accent, German-Jewish Emigre Stories. In the last event, we looked at the importance of history and legacy upon artistic practice with three second-generation contemporary artists, Julie Held, Barbara Loftus, and Carrie Gorney. If you missed that event, it's still available via a link, and that will be put into the chat, and you can access it via Vimeo. Today, we are examining the legacy of two first-generation artists, Hans Feibusch and Martin Bloch, with the grandsons and executors of their respective estates, whom I'll introduce shortly. To begin with, we are going to hear some welcoming remarks from the Deputy Ambassador of the German Embassy London, who unfortunately cannot be with us live, but has kindly sent us a recording. This will be followed by an introduction by Professor Andrea Hamel, Professor of German and the Director of the Centre for the Movement of People at Aberystwyth University, and author of the acclaimed publication, The Kindertransport, What Really Happened, published by Polity Books.
A very warm welcome to our lunchtime talk, Painting with an Accent, the legacy of Hans Feibusch and Martin Bloch. Over the next hour, we will be exploring the themes of the digital exhibition, Painting with an Accent, German-Jewish Emigre Stories. The exhibition was realized and curated by the Ben-Uri Gallery London in partnership with the German Embassy London to mark last year's 85th anniversary of the November pogroms and the start of the Kindertransport. The exhibition showcases the work of 10 first and second generation German-Jewish émigré artists. It captures their artistic responses to their own or their relatives' dramatic flight from Nazi persecution and subsequent lives as German-Jewish émigré artists in the United Kingdom. With this online exhibition, we want to pay tribute to the many German-Jewish émigrés who fled the Nazi regime and Nazi-occupied territories in Europe and found freedom and a new home in Britain. We also want to honor the thousands of children and all the other refugees who were forced to flee their homes under traumatic circumstances on the Kindertransport or via other routes. The digital exhibition and this event are the latest in a series of commemorative tributes during these important anniversary years. They include last year's visit by the President of the German Bundestag, Bärbel Baas, to the Kindertransport Memorial at a Liverpool street station, with a similar event taking place at the Kindertransport Memorial in Friedrichstraße, Berlin. I would also like to mention the King's visit to the Kindertransport Memorial in Hamburg during his state visit to Germany last year, and the current exhibition on the Kindertransport in the German Bundestag. The German Embassy, London's contribution with an evening event at the ambassador's residence in November last year. As part of the event also held in cooperation with Ben-Uri Gallery, we explored the unique stories of trauma, resilience and hope expressed through works of art with Dame Stephanie Shirley and three second-generation German-Jewish émigré artists, Julie Held, Barbara Loftus, and Carrie Gorney. We will shortly learn more about the historical background from Professor Andrea Hamel, Professor of German and Director of the Center for the Movement of People at Aberystwyth University. Before I hand over to Professor Hamel, followed by Sarah McDougall, Paul Wert, and Peter Rossiter, let me just add a few words about why this is such an immensely important topic for us at the German Embassy. Germany, of all countries, has a historic responsibility to defend our liberal values, to protect our democracy and the rule of law. And we will stand up against any form of terrorism that threatens our way of life. It is also our responsibility to keep our Jewish friends and neighbors safe in Germany and across the world. And this is more relevant now than ever. 86 years on from the November pogroms, we find ourselves confronted with a dangerous rise in anti-Semitism, including in Germany, against the backdrop of the horrific attacks on Israel. This has sent shockwaves through our societies and Jewish communities everywhere, including in the United Kingdom. Anti-Semitism, extremism, and terrorism have no place in our country. No form of anti-Semitism, be it left-wing or right-wing, will be accepted in Germany. Everyone who makes his home in Germany, regardless of origin, experience, or religion, must know about Auschwitz, and everyone must understand the historical responsibility Germany has as the perpetrator of the Shoah. The stories and the artworks in our exhibition are a sobering reminder that it is up to all of us to fight against all forms of anti-Semitism and racism wherever we find them. Please allow me to conclude by saying a huge thank you to Sarah McDougall and her team at Ben-Uri for the wonderful collaboration of this project. My thanks also go to Professor Hammel, Paul Wert, and Peter Rossiter for sharing with us their expertise as well as their personal legacy of the Kindertransport. Thank you to you, our guests, for taking the time out of your lunch break to be with us today to honor two exceptional German Jewish émigré artists, Hans Feibusch and Martin Bloch. It is now my pleasure to hand over to Professor Hammel.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Andrea Hammel. I'm going to share some slides with you now. And I am very pleased that I can speak to you today on this occasion. I'm not an expert in past history. I am an expert in history, social history, the social history of refugees from National Socialism. I also happen to have a personal connection to the subject of today. I've already just mentioned, I actually lived quite close to a place, St. Wilfrid's Church in Elm Grove in Brighton, where there was a Hans Feibusch painting in the church. The church, by the time I lived there, was converted into flats. I also have some personal connection or some investment in the legacy of Martin Bloch, because I've recently written a book on refugees from National Socialism who made their lives in Wales. And I told the stories of Josef Hermann, a Polish Jewish artist who lived in Wales from 1944 to 1955 in this book, Finding Refuge. And I also told the story of Heinz Koppel, who was a very young man, a teenager really, came to the UK with his family, who established a business in South Wales, and he studied under Martin Bloch. What we really have to make clear to us when we talk about refugees from National Socialism, and we are talking here about the people who came to the UK, who fled to the UK, is the background, is the persecution. Why did people have to leave? Both Feibusch and Bloch left relatively early, 1933, 1944, 1933, 1934. But the persecution of the Jews obviously started immediately after Hitler's takeover of power in January 1933. On your right on the screen, you have a picture of Dr. Michael Siegel, who is paraded through the streets of Munich and humiliated really on 10th of March 1933. Dr. Siegel was a lawyer in Munich with a well-established legal practice, who in March 1933 went to the police headquarters in Munich to complain on the behalf of a client, a Jewish department store owner, about the unwarranted arrest of this department store owner. So he still felt that the legal system in Germany should still be upheld, even though obviously the Nazis had taken power. But when he complained to the police, he was put in a room with some SAS men who beat him up, who burst his eardrum, who injured him severely, who cut off his trousers, and then made him to walk around the streets, paraded him around the streets of Munich with this sign round his neck. And this sign says in German, "Ich werde mich nie mehr bei der Polizei beschweren." I will never again complain to the police. He was forced to do this for about an hour until he managed to escape outside Munich main railway station by jumping into a taxi and getting this taxi to drive him home. This had obviously had serious effects on him and his family. It took him a long time to recover physically and mentally, if at all, and they decided to send their children on a Kindertransport to the UK. Their daughter is B. Green, who is still alive, was given some of her possessions to the Imperial War Museum to be exhibited in the Holocaust exhibition. Particularly in reference to artists, of course, artists were persecuted for their Jewish background, but obviously also for their art, the art we will talk about and you will talk about, the experts will talk about later. Here on the other side, on the left, we have the exhibition catalogue of the Entartete Kunst exhibition of 1937, an exhibition I'm sure other people will know more about, that was to show the art as something that was not valued, but of course a lot of people who actually visited the exhibition did so because they wanted to see modern art. As I said, Bloch and Freibusch were amongst the people who arrived quite early in the UK, and the UK had very interesting rules, interesting in inverted commas, I suppose, regarding refugees and asylum seekers. The first act that established the so-called asylum clause in international law was actually UK law. It was the Aliens Act of 1905, where it was established that generally people could only come into the UK if they could prove at the border. This was an individual test that they could support themselves, but there was a clause in this act, in this law of 1905, that if they were persecuted due to their religion or their political conviction, they would not necessarily have to prove that they were able to support themselves. This Aliens Act was changed several times in response to the First World War, more refugees arriving, also the hostilities, and obviously, especially the people from Germany and Austria, obviously considered rather dangerous individuals and interned in some cases. The UK did not have a visa requirement, so it was still an individual choice whether people were admitted or not. And on the map, you can see some numbers, how many people, and we are talking here, people, German-speaking people who sought admission to the UK in the different phases. And between 1933 and 1935, it was actually only 4,500 individuals. Then up to March 1938, it was about 5,500 individuals. And then after March 1938, everything changed and the numbers became much larger. This was due to the annexation of Austria and many people, Jewish people from Austria, trying to seek refuge in the UK. In response, the UK introduced a visa requirement in April 1938. So now it was not an individual decision of the officers at the border. You had to apply for visa in advance. And this made admission to the UK very much more complicated. The November pogrom of 1938 led lots of people, ordinary citizens in the UK, realize again and much more that the Jewish population in the German Reich was under pressure. And they demanded from their government that they should implement a new rule to help, to aid the Jewish population in the German Reich. And what the UK government came up was the visa waiver scheme that was later to be called the Kindertransport, a visa waiver scheme for those under 18. Those over 18 could only under very specific conditions receive a visa. But as we've said, Feibusch and Bloch arrived in this early phase in 1933, 1934. Now, one other specific aspect of the UK's admission policy was that the government of the United Kingdom very much put the emphasis on voluntary organization to deal with refugees. And as you can see, this is a quote from something Neville Chamberlain, the then Prime Minister, said in the House of Commons. In very much, he puts the emphasis on voluntary organizations to deal with the refugees, to undertake the responsibility for selecting, receiving, and maintaining a further number of refugees. So I hope this gives you a little background about the policy, the social history of refugees from National Socialism who sought to escape in the different phases. And obviously we will hear more now about two that actually managed to escape and what they did in the UK. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm happy to have questions at the end, should there be any. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Andrea for that very stimulating and helpful introduction. And I'm now really delighted to welcome our two very special guests. We have with us Paul Wirth, grandson and executor of the estate of Hans Feibusch, and Peter Rossiter, grandson and co-executor of the estate of Martin Bloch. Both are incredibly knowledgeable about their artist grandfathers, and both have done an exemplary job in not only preserving, but extending and keeping alive their artistic legacies. Both artists, as we've already heard, left Germany as adults prior to the Kindertransport, but through example, and in Bloch's case, through teaching, became important influences upon the artistic development of the next generation, including those artists who came with the Kindertransport themselves. So in this panel discussion, we're going to explore the lives, careers, and impact in Britain and the commonalities and divergences in the paths of these two important.
There's a dog. What's up?
Artists. So forgive me while I get the slideshow started.
All right.
So we're going to begin with you, Paul, and we have on the screen this photograph, this early photograph of Hans with his painting The Fishmonger. So what can you tell us very briefly about his early life prior to his departure from Germany and something of the circumstances that led to his departure?
Thank you, Sarah. Well, Hans was born into an assimilated liberal Jewish family and did very well at school. And by 1916, he was conscripted into the army and sent to the Russian front. He would often later refer to the experience, particularly the dark, dense, and mysterious forests. He by the early 1920s, started his artistic studies, first in Munich with Stanislas Stuttgart, and later in Berlin, completed studies as a master's student in the studio of Karl Hofer. And shortly after that, he was awarded a Rome scholarship and traveled to Florence and Venice, and was profoundly influenced by the great Renaissance artists. And that can be seen in much of his mural works later on. Returning, he then went to Paris, to the studio of Othon Fries and André Lhote, widely exhibited in Paris. And by 1930, he was awarded the German Grand State Prize for Painters by the Prussian Academy of Arts for the painting The Fishmonger, which is we see on screen now. So he already enjoyed a relatively high profile. By 1933, the picture I think we'll see next of Power has a story behind it, and he was a member of an artistic association, something rather like the London Group here, and they would meet regularly and show one another their work. One day, a man came and asked if he could sit in, and he regularly attended until one of the artists asked him why he doesn't come with some work to show his colleagues. Well, the subsequent week, he turned up in full Nazi uniform, SS uniform, jumped on the table, pointed to the Jewish members, you and you can simply go home, you'll never show or sell your work again. This was a marker for Hans that he needed to leave. And he tried to renew his passport, but that was refused by the Nazis. And of course, by 1937, he was already here, though he was the sole surviving exhibitor of the Entartete Kunst, or Degenerate Art exhibition. On the way home one evening, he saw two thugs beating up some poor soul, and this was in his mind when he drew the rather powerful Power, and this led him to make plans to leave Germany as soon as possible. The picture on the right, the dancer, is typical of Hans's style of that period.
Thank you. And it's interesting how he's reusing that format, and the dancer, although a lighter subject, feels quite threatening also.
There is also a darker side to the painting, to the picture, yes, indeed.
And that leads us on really to this picture from 1939.
This was his premonition of what was to come. Also in his mind at the time was the tragic death of his brother in 1929, caused by an avalanche, and Hans had to go to the train station and collect the body. And so we see these three figures stiff and in pain, and it was one of the two pictures that that the Tate Gallery acquired, fortunately in Hans's lifetime. So it's was delightful really to see it in the Tate Gallery during Hans's lifetime.
And of course, by this time, Hans had come over to Britain. He had a British fiancée, Sidonie.
Yes, he was engaged to my grandmother Sidonie, who was English, and together they left Germany in 1933 to settle here.
And we're seeing at this moment just another of the works using this same vertical format. And this is one of the works, of course, that we have in the digital exhibition.
Yes.
If you'd like to tell us a little more about it.
The Return of the Prodigal Son. It's a favorite of mine because really the story is one of love and forgiveness. It's also, I think, a very strong example of Feibusch's work. and as I said earlier, it was one of the two paintings that the Tate wanted to acquire.
Fantastic. Thank you. We're going to leave Hans there for a moment, and I'm going to turn to you, Peter, and ask you the same question as I started by asking Paul. So can you tell us a little bit about Martin's early life and what prompted his departure from Germany?
Yes. Can you see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Okay. Well, Martin was from a slightly earlier generation than Hans, born in 1883. So by the time he fled Germany, he was already just touching his 50s. And his career as an artist can be almost exactly divided between the time he was painting based in Germany, or I should say rather in Europe, because he painted a lot in Spain and in Italy, and the rest of his career, which followed after he arrived in England. His background was very similar to Hans's, middle class, I would call it really bourgeois kind of environment. His father was owned a manufacturing business which made lace and employed a number of people. He was earmarked to be the son who would take over the family business, but kind of sidestepped that, and it fell on his brother to do that. He kind of escaped from that world into the artistic world, because he just was drawn immediately to the idea of being an artist. He started off by doing it in a scholarly kind of way, partly to appease his parents, and studying in Munich, and then studying drawing with Corinth, and then liberated by a small inheritance, he then set off for Paris, where he met up with pupils of Matisse, and then during the First World War, he spent the entire period of the First World War in Spain. He went there ostensibly on a holiday at the right time, and got over the border and traveled around Spain, supplementing his income by teaching German. And he met up with people like Sonia Delaunay and other people who were in the Berlin and German art scene in Spain. But he spent the whole period of that time developing his idea of being an artist. And then he returned to Germany for his first big one-man show with Paul Kucera in 1920. And that's where he met my grandmother and got married in the same year. And then he then set himself up as a teacher in Berlin. And yes, this is the top image, shows the flyer for his private teaching, his studio in Berlin, and you can see the name Schmidt-Rottluff. Schmidt-Rottluff took over from his first associate, and this flyer is just before he was forced to leave. It was a time when he would have quite happily, if it hadn't been for the rise of Nazis, he would have continued in Germany teaching. He was well established as himself as an artistic career. And the second,
what led him to leave Germany?
Well, similar kind of things to Hans. There was an exhibition. He was elected because he was independent in his thinking. He was elected as a hanging secretary for an exhibition in Berlin, and he was put in a very difficult position. Some SS soldiers, accompanied by the Crown Prince Wilhelm, marched in during the process of hanging the exhibition, and said that these works should not be shown, and obviously selecting Jewish named artists or artists that had already been frowned upon by the regime. This was in 33. So the persecution was quite clear, and there were other personal reasons as well. It's complicated, but anyway, he managed to escape via Denmark. This is a typical painting of the period just before his leaving, done in 33. It shows the Verbindingsplatz and tram depot. The yellow structures there are the trams, and it's during a strike. There's one figure kind of lurking behind one of the phone boxes on the right, and there's a very kind of acidic and brutal atmosphere. The tram lines seem to kind of wrap themselves around the building in a very expressive way. And the building on the left and the back is not a synagogue, a mosque. And the building on the right is the crematorium, and you can see flames coming out of the roof of the crematorium. And this was to commemorate, in a way, what had been going on the streets of Berlin, which was pitched battles between the socialists who were striking and the Nazis, who were using it as a way of using the strife that was happening as a way of gaining power and picking on their enemies.
Thank you. And I think we have a picture here which is
Denmark.
Journey to Denmark.
Yes. Yeah. What happened with Denmark was basically my grandmother was a member of the Pen Club. Writers. She was a journalist, and they went to a meeting, and there was a wonderful lady called Karen Michaelis, who was a writer and a very well-established name in Denmark and in Germany, much loved in Germany. And she said in the meeting, if any of you, kind of nodding in the direction of people that she knew were Jewish, would need to somewhere to stay at short notice. I have places on an island outside Svendborg, a place called Toro. Now this drawing, it's a little complicated. In this drawing, I believe the sketch that you can see on the left probably dates from 34, but he also returned in 36 with pupils after establishing himself in London. So the subject matter is about Denmark and the freedom and the kind of joy and also the expression of feeling that he had about it. And I particularly find interesting that the sketch has in shorthand in the sky the same shape as appears in the cloud in the sky as well, which I see it as a kind of violin. And I find in his work a lot of references to kind of musical feelings and composition. Thistles and crocus, again, from the same period. Martin said that to my grandmother that this painting was about leaving Germany. It's in Leeds City Museum and Art Gallery. On the left, you can see dried out thistles, symbolizing the end of the year, the death of the life that he was leading in Germany. And on the right, one crocus in flower, like a flame, like a symbol of the life, carrying life forward in a pot, in a small container, and what he feels about life continuing. Okay, you can see. And here again, another painting about very much about his feelings about what's important to him. This was shown in his lifetime in 38. It was exhibited with the title Treasures. And what it shows is cards and other artwork made by my mother, who was born in 1922. So 11-year-old's work. And the card on the left shows celebrating Martin reaching his 50th birthday. And my mother has made a kind of collage with colored paper. You can see the artist with his bald head and his pipe writing the name 50 as seen by his daughter. And in the middle is a calendar. That's the other name for the work, the calendars. And on the right is a folder. And then in the foreground, very importantly, the artist's palette and his color wheel and some other cards that were made by my mother as well.
And this work, I think you have said,
Yes.
is one that uniquely addresses Jewish heritage.
Well, it's actually, I've revised my
Settle
thinking
down.
about it slightly. There is another drawing dated 1935, which also strongly features a piece of material with a Jewish Star of David on it.
Fifi.
Now, these pieces of material, according to an interview he gave to the newspaper, were pieces that he found remaindered in a shop in Kensington High Street. And it's a very big painting. It was the largest painting in his one-man show at Lefebvre Gallery in 1939. A big for him. I mean, he didn't work in very large scale, but this was a large painting. And what he's done is he's hung the pieces of material across the studio on a string, and they've become the subject of the still life. There's a kind of shorthand still life, rather a la Braque, in the bottom right-hand corner, a kind of an excuse for a still life, as it were. But the main subject is the material, and the thought that is going on is the importance of the Star of David, which is now central to him. And he said quite clearly that he felt himself to be a European, not particularly a German. I mean, where he was born, Nysa, is now part of Poland. And he spent a lot of time painting in Italy, which he loved very much, on the Lake of Garda. So this painting is about him thinking about, to my mind, his Jewish roots. And I think really what happens is that what we discover in it is that his roots are not in his racial identity, but in his art. He believed that painting was the thing that was most important to him in his life, and that was his continuity. And he set his mind between 1914 and 1918 to become a painter, and that's what he stuck to, painting and teaching painting. He did very little else with his talents. He didn't do much commercial art of any kind. He did a tiny bit of book illustration, but that wasn't really his thing. He devoted himself almost like a calling, like a religious calling, to the world of art.
Thank you, Peter. And we're going to leave Martin for a moment and turn back to Hans. Now we've got them both safely in Britain and establishing themselves here. So Paul, would you like to tell us a little bit about the kind of work that Hans is doing at this stage?
Yes, he'd been in London a short time, and I think his very first commission was for London Zoo, which I think we'll come to later. But here we've got two examples of work he did, one for the London Underground and the Royal Academy, and they're very typical. And he really jumped at every opportunity to work. And that's really all I've got to say on these two images.
Sure.
They led to, of course, much more work later on. This drawing, I think we included because it does show his draftsmanship. Apparently one day he went out and with his sketch pad, and this is one of the many results. I don't think he probably had permission to do this, but nevertheless, here it is.
Okay. Of course, we know that artists did actually need permission particularly if they were so-called enemy aliens. But Hans, of course, came early and did manage to take out
Yes, with his English fiancée, and of course they married in 35. He wasn't interned. I think he drove an ambulance for some of the time in London, but in this context, he went on to receive his first mural commission, which I think we'll talk about a little later.
We will, thank you. So we have Hans here in wartime, and then we're just going back to Martin Bloch, and of course this
Okay.
picture is before the outbreak of war, but
Yes.
obviously after he's settled in
Yes.
London.
Martin was absolutely delighted to find London was much more colourful than he had been led to believe. I mean, his picture of London before he got there was kind of fog, the stereotypical kind of image of greyness and fog. And he was absolutely enthralled by the colour in London streets. This shows a brand new item, the Belisha Beacon, only introduced the year before this painting, and the very typical livery of the London Transport with the red and gold top, and that wonderful green, that very distinctive green used on the street furniture by various London Transport and other items on the streets, and then the taxis and the movement and life. You can see the tremendous contrast in feeling and emotion between this painting and the street scene I showed before in Berlin. This is Victoria Station, just outside Victoria Station, and just a short way from Ebury Street, where he had his first studio, which he shared space with the artist Roy de Maistre.
But then, of course, he wasn't as lucky as Hans.
No, he was. Hans got British citizenship in time. Martin failed to do so and was rounded up and interned as an enemy alien. And this was a more devastating experience for him, almost in many ways, than actually having to leave Germany. To come to Britain was quite an attractive idea, and I think I recently read a piece by Walter Benjamin where he describes the freedom that he saw in 1932 as in England compared with the ensuing military dictatorship in Germany, and so then to be rounded up and imprisoned, it seemed like an awful contradiction. The subject of this painting is it's called The Miracle, and it's a transubstantiation process has taken place. Every day, almost, it seemed, they were given herrings to eat, and they were heartily sick. I mean, herring once is okay, but 5 times or 6 times a week, it's just becomes obnoxious. And the miracle is that these herrings have somehow miraculously turned into rather voluptuous images of women that they've been separated from. Martin is in the bottom right-hand side of the picture with his beret on, and his closest friend in the middle is Walter Nessler, who remained a lifelong friend, but they were particularly close during the time that they were together in the camp. The other 2 characters, sorry, could I just go back a moment? The other 2 characters are also friends, but the rather militaristic chap on the top left is unable to see and therefore doesn't get the feeling of what's going on, which is the friendship that's sustaining the artist. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm hurrying us on a little.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, a shorter time. Yes. This is a self-portrait in 42. A rather symbolic feeling to it in that he's wearing a hat which is like a culotte or a French Phrygian hat, and it's the time of the fall of France, the occupation of France, and he had very close friendships and feelings for the people of France as well as for Spain and Italy. And this is a self-portrait, but also an expression of his concern for what's going on in the rest of Europe at the time. Okay. This is a typical response to wartime London. After release from internment, he was allowed to go and draw in the City of London to record the bomb damage. And we have a number of his drawings which have the official indelible ink stamp on the back of them authorizing him to be there. And this is one of the most important paintings he produced. You can see the gas balloons in the air, the ruins of buildings, people working, gathering up and sorting out the debris, the miraculous survival of the church, and the symbolic trees that rise up into the sky. Their twigs have been broken, but there's still a symbol, a feeling of life and nature being somehow more important than what's going on in the world of man. And indeed, from this period onwards, after the war, for many years, trees became the main subject of his work.
And we move on here to after
Yes.
the war and
Yeah.
his participation, like many of your
Yeah.
images, in the Festival of Britain.
Okay, yeah, so we've taken a considerable jump. We're getting close to the end of his life. This is a painting, yeah, commissioned work for the Festival of Britain. He is identifying here with the workers who are slate quarrymen, not coal workers, and they are returning home from work across a bridge. That it's about a 20-minute walk or so down the hill from the slate quarry, and they are quite old and fairly, particularly the man on the right is walking with two sticks. Martin is identifying with the older worker, and it's a picture about the end of an industry in decline, and nature as a place that's been disturbed by man in many ways. The heaps on the in the background are slag heaps from the slate waste. They're not mountains, and the river in the foreground with these lurid colours. I've actually been there and found that there is a lot of iron oxide in the water and strange coloured green moss. It was typical of Martin to take his palette from the subject matter that he saw around him, and to set the key, as it were, the musical key of his work according to what he saw in nature, and then work from that.
Thank you. And to conclude, really,
Yes.
to wrap up this very long life
Feature.
in summary.
Yes. I chose this slide because it's not by Martin Bloch, but it shows Martin in the common room of the Camberwell, and it's a picture that tells the story immediately. You can see he's the only colourful figure there, and his legacy to Camberwell lasted well after his time there. In the introductory talk to his opening of the exhibition, our posthumous exhibition in the Arts Council by Leonard Daniels, said that he had a lasting impact on the teaching of the drawing, particularly drawing from life and use of colour. And artists like Gillian Ayres, for example, are one of the people that I would say, inherited this feeling for colour that Martin instilled in his pupils.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And so turning back then to see what Hans is doing in the same period, Paul, can you tell us about the images we have on screen?
Yes, the sea fantasy is a favourite of mine. Every time I look at it, I see something else, some other creature from the oceans. It also shows that he did have a sense of humour. And the image on the left, Mandrill and Mangabeys, he, I believe, drew as a poster for London Zoo, but subsequently modified it for the School Print series in 1946 and 7, a government-led initiative which sent prints of pretty much all the major artists of the day to all the schools in the country. At the same time, around this time, Hans had his book on mural painting published, a treatise on the history, technique, and theory of mural painting.
And I think the next slide we're going to see
Is, again, Britain Can Make It. These are great fun. He produced quite a large number of preparatory drawings and paintings to decorate the Tea Pavilion in the V&A, who now have these images, or most of them. It's an important time because Britain was exhausted from the war, and the whole purpose was to help revitalize and rebuild the country.
And so we see it included indeed in the Britain Can Make It famous exhibition. But
yes,
what else is going on in Hans's life at the same time?
I'm so sorry?
What else is going on in Hans's?
Well, he a little later on took holidays everywhere from Cornwall to Italy. This particular painting illustrates, again, typical Freibusch coloring. It illustrates that he enjoyed landscape painting just as much as he was known as a figurative painter. This particular one, I think, is Sicily, and hangs on my wall.
Wonderful. And what can you tell us about this fascinating photograph?
This is great fun. We included this because it shows the artist, the builder, the Bishop of Southwark, and Thomas Ford, the architect, who actually was responsible for securing Hans's first commission for the Church of England. It also gives one a feel for the moment of the time.
So of course Hans will go on to become known as being responsible for more murals in the Church of England churches than any other artist.
In history, yes, he's been written up more recently with that sort of headline. Thomas Ford, as I mentioned, helped him secure his first mural work in Collier's Wood, South London. It was an image of the foot washing. It was reported in the Times, and Sir Kenneth Clarke, who was then director of the National Gallery, saw it and met up with Hans and helped him secure all sorts of contacts, which led subsequently to commissions. So that's this image is again a preparatory painting for a mural. He would produce a number of different images before he went to the actual wall, a completely different color scheme sometimes, and changing the juxtaposition of the figures. At this time, I think it's worth mentioning, he was also awarded the German Order of Merit, First Class, and several decades later, the German Grand Cross of Merit. So he did enjoy recognition both sides of the channel.
That's good to know. And this here we have one of his biggest commissions with these 12 huge panels for the Newport Civic project.
Yes, it was a massive work, 3.5 or 4 years. I've yet to see a camera which can capture all 12 panels. Years later, I think as a preface in his book Mural Painting, and I'll read it, he said, to stand before an empty wall in a trance, to let shapes cloudily emerge, to draw scenes and figures, to let light and dark rush out of the surface to make them move outward or recede into the depths. This was bliss. And I dare say he had it in the back of his mind, the memories of the great Renaissance painters that he saw in Italy. It's a massive work which shows
panels there in more detail.
Yes, it shows the history of the region, and is it's a wonderful work which I've seen several times. The image on the right, Battle of Agincourt, again, his choice of colouring, I think, is typical Freibusch. It's a massive work, and one which I think does him is most complimentary to him anyway.
And we move from that to a slightly more unusual commission, which was for a synagogue in North London.
Yes, in the West London synagogue, commissioned by, I think, a Holocaust survivor, which subsequently Ben-Uri acquired and is now on long-term loan to St. Boniface German Church in London. I can't help thinking it's an example of same goal, different team.
Very good. And as another example of his wide practice here.
Yes, in the 70s, he underwent a series of operations on his eyes, which were failing. And while they were still covered, I think 6 or 8 weeks without seeing, someone put a lump of clay in front of him, and he took to it like a duck to water. This image of his friend, Sir Clough Williams-Ellis, was a larger-than-life character and very charismatic. He decided to give him a laurel wreath, as you can see. The bust is, the head is now in the National Portrait Gallery. And of course, Williams-Ellis was the person who created the Italian fishing village fantasy in Portmeirion, where Hans and Sidonia often went for a summer holiday. And Hans's murals are still in situ and well looked after, which is lovely.
Fantastic. And our final slide, sadly.
Hans was 98 years old when he drew this. He spent his whole life searching for spiritual meaning, and he didn't really limit himself to any one of the 4 great religions. In 1992, he formally left the Church of England and returned to his Jewish roots. However, he did remain freelance, though chose to be buried with Jewish liturgy. He was fundamentally a lucky man. He returned unscathed, at least physically, from the horrors of the First War, to meeting and marrying my English grandmother, to one time high up on scaffolding in the ballroom of the Dorchester Hotel. He made that classic mistake of stepping back to look at his work. Apparently, he fell 20 or more feet and landed in a kettle drum, breaking its skin and saving his own in the process.
What a miraculous story. And of course, you know, it's worth saying again how he had this fantastically long life in contrast to Martin's shorter life. And so Hans had the longer period working in Britain, of course. So just to conclude our whistle-stop tour through both artists' lives, and before we hand over to our audience for their questions, I'm just going to quickly ask you both, and I know this is a very hard thing to do, but Paul first and then Peter, can you sum up the legacy of your artist grandfathers in one sentence, if at all possible?
In one sentence, well, by subject, his work can be divided into 3 categories: the natural world, mythology, and the Bible. So I think I'll let his extensive body of work speak for itself.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And the same question to you, Peter.
Well, yes, I think I was already anticipating that question when I spoke about Leonard Daniels speaking in 1957 and his lasting impact on the art teaching in Camberwell. And then more after that, the continuing awareness of his work that's still kind of, it's bubbling away beneath the surface. And I feel confident that he will become as well known as some of the more major names that he was associated with in his early days in Germany.
Thank you. Now, I think we're going to stop the share and go over and see if our audience have any questions for us. So we have a question here for Paul. How far did Feibusch's Jewish background and experience of persecution influence his work, and in particular, his church murals?
He was first an artist, and the stories from both the Old and New Testament captured his imagination. He never lost his Jewishness, and I think it's awfully difficult to know. Towards in the early 90s, there were a number of major television productions on the Holocaust. This affected him and reminded him, not that he'd ever forgotten. And I think that led him to go back to his Jewish roots, and chose to be buried with Jewish liturgy. He did one time in the studio just exclaim, "I'm just a tired old Jew." And I think he must have been 99 at that age.
That's wonderful to know. There's lots of thanks coming through to you both for people who've very much enjoyed listening to you both. I'm just seeing if there are any other questions for you. Nothing that we can see there. I know I've had to hurry you both today, and so I would urge everyone to look at the online catalogue and the exhibition, and to see more of the work and to see it more in detail. There is another question coming through here. This one is for, two questions here. One from Di Wilkins. There was a Hans Feibusch mural in St. Elizabeth's Church in Eastbourne. There was a campaign to save it, and it was recovered and put into storage. And does anyone know what its future is now?
That's a very good question. It was in the crypt of St. Elizabeth's Eastbourne of Pilgrim's Progress. And the mural has been saved. A digital copy has been made, and the actual work itself is in storage in one of the buildings belonging to the Church of England.
Right. Okay.
So that's a project in progress to find a suitable home.
Okay. Well, let's hope that happens. So another question here for Andrea. The early mural at former St. Wilfrid's Church in Brighton does survive after a fashion. Sorry, it's more of a comment than a question. Only it's in the common area of the flats. Thank you, Robert. Yes, I think Andrea has seen it there. Many more thanks coming through, and for those asking if a recording will be available, yes, it will be available. I think it's generally a day or two after the event, but if you have signed up today, then you will receive a notification of when the recording is ready. Oh, I think there's just another thanks coming through. So, and Robert is adding that the Eastbourne mural was on the theme of Pilgrim's Progress, but a home has yet to be found for it, as has been said. So I think there will probably bring today's proceedings to a close. I'd like to thank you both very much. And again, thank you, Andrea, for your wonderful talk at the beginning. And please do look at the exhibition and please read Andrea's fantastic new book. Okay, thank you and good afternoon to everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Sarah.